Blessings. It's Tuesday night and a few Dhamma questions have come in, so take the time to try and answer them. The first question. Dear Luang Por, I am grateful for the teachings, and to hear the Dhamma is indeed my good karma. Recently you have spoken that one kind of bullying comes from a person's mental defilements, and I cannot agree with you more. I have noticed that after hearing meaningful teachings or contemplation and insights that seem to be arising, however, my memories will start manifesting all sorts of unskillful and embarrassing events that I have committed in the past to stop me from reaping the full benefits of the Dhamma. I find this habitual mental process very frustrating and tiring. May I know if there is a way to stop these mental habits from happening? I think that's quite common for Dhamma practitioners and meditators. We have all kinds of memories pop into the mind, and as you become more mindful and are trying to be mindful, then you're aware of things that have happened in the past that maybe weren't the best, things you said or did or thought, things that happened to you, things you witnessed other people doing. That's just normal, and part of our practice is learning how to be mindful as these things come up. And they will come up because that's the point. When you act in an unwholesome way, think or speak or act out of greed, anger, delusion and all their kind of secondary mental defilements, then it agitates the mind, doesn't make you feel at ease, doesn't make you feel peaceful or happy, agitates the mind, brings you feelings of pain, suffering, and that will come up, and you'll notice it when you're trying to meditate. You'll remember the foolish, confused, selfish, cruel things that you've done in the past, and you won't feel good about it when they come up. And that will be your first reaction. Just like when you walk along the street and you tread on a pebble or stub your toe on something hard, it hurts. Or if you're sitting and a wasp or a mosquito comes and stings you, it hurts. You'd say this is your old karma, a little bit of pain as some animal bites you or you bang your toe. Well, mentally it happens as well, and you remember things, and sometimes they're painful memories because it was an unwholesome act you did, and now you're in a more mindful, peaceful state. You can really see that clearly. So sometimes the more mindful you are, the worse it gets. So you have to be patient with that and have some understanding. That's where you need the wise reflection. Yes, I've made mistakes. Yes, I've broken precepts. Yes, I've hurt people in the past or hurt myself. You have to accept that. But as it comes up, you allow it just to be a memory. It's just a memory. It comes up. It may not be a pleasant memory, but that's all it is. It may be embarrassing, uncomfortable feeling, but then it passes away again. The more steady your mindfulness is, and the more reflective your mind is at that moment, then you can allow the memory to come up, and then you let it go again with mindfulness, knowing it's just a memory. And it doesn't have to be a cause for further suffering. So you allow the memory to pass away. You don't form a new sense of self-identity around it, that, oh, I'm a bad person, I've done all these bad things. You're witnessing or recognizing that you have done unskillful things maybe, but that was in the past, and you don't have to repeat them. You can say, well, I don't do that now, or I no longer intend to act in that way. you've learnt. And mindfulness and wise reflection leads on to equanimity, steadiness of mind. So you understand karma, that it does have a result, and you're maybe experiencing the result. But you accept that with equanimity, with calm, balance, coolness of mind. And it doesn't have to create anything fresh. When you're truly mindful, you just know it's just old karma and let it go. So it's as if that old person who did those things dies away, and that's the end of it. And the more you do that, well, less and less those old events will come up bothering your mind, because you know them, you know the memory, you know what happened, you understand it, you accept it, but now you let go. Sometimes that is hard work because, like you say, it's frustrating. Sometimes old memories come up and we're not fast enough and clear enough in our mindfulness, and our wisdom and intelligence is not at its best. So then they prompt more reactions of self-aversion, feeling guilty, feeling sad, mental agitation and anxiety based on previous actions, one thing or another. So you have to be very patient and just keep bringing up the mindfulness. And they will stop, and the more mindful you are and the more you establish skillful intentions, well then your old intentions arising don't bother you so much, they just become memories that arise, pass away. It's just a mental activity, but you're not attaching to it with a sense of self or reacting with suffering. So precepts are like that. Previously you broke precepts, didn't keep precepts. Those memories are uncomfortable, but now you've decided to keep the precepts. You know why, and you know how you're doing it, and you know the benefit of it. Then your mind can be peaceful, even with unpleasant memories. So as you practice more, your memory doesn't disappear, but the way you relate to memory, sanya, memory, the thinking, the physical sensations and pain and pleasure and pain, and then the pleasant moods and the unpleasant moods in the mind, the more you treat them with mindfulness and wisdom, the less they cause you suffering. Next question. Luang Por, good evening. I have a practice, observation and question. In my daily activities, I notice feelings that are neutral, feelings of liking or disliking, and I recognize my intentions to speak or act. Sometimes a voice in my mind reminds me that craving, clinging or attachment to certain food, views or people can lead to suffering. However, I find it challenging to control these impulses all the time. I seek your guidance on how to address this. Well, this follows on sort of from the last question. We often tend to want to control things more. And so if we have impulses, feelings, mental states arising that we don't like, don't agree with, we want to get rid of them. And thereby we often create more suffering than we need to. And that wanting to get rid of something you don't like, don't want, is craving and attachment. Therefore it will easily lead to suffering. And it's often something you don't even realize. It's fast, it's automatic, habitual. The idea is to develop more mindfulness so you just know the feeling, the emotional state, the mental state, the thought, the intention, you just know it first. And with knowing, clarity and clear comprehension, you can use wisdom to see, well, this is an unwholesome thing, this should be abandoned. You know that. Once you know it, you can see the path of practice is to abandon it. Don't indulge it, don't hold on to it, don't keep it there. But you need to establish the mindfulness first. And that's the frustrating part, because mindfulness fades away and we are lost in our thoughts and moods again. So if we're ever putting effort, and where our effort is largely put or used is to bring up mindfulness. So it can be very frustrating, tiring. And challenging, as you say. But sometimes what you notice when mindfulness becomes more steady, clear comprehension is present, you're more clearer, then this quality of knowing is much brighter and able to discern what is going on in a more natural way. It's not so frustrating and challenging. You're not trying to struggle so much. Sometimes you are, but much of the time there's a sense of ease and naturalness to the process, that mindfulness, as it's more continuous and you experience states of calm, allows you to be more able to know your experience in a detached way. So you're separating back from the feeling, the thought, physical feeling, mental feeling. You're just knowing it, and as you know something, you can see it arise and cease. You can see it as dukkha, therefore not to cling to it, and you're much more objective and equanimous, so the sense of self is fading. And with the sense of self fading, the mind keeps going to equanimity more and more, equanimity towards physical and mental conditions, which is both peaceful and is the best way for the mind to learn the truth and see the truth and to let go. So even trying to control things, push things away, get rid of things is a form of craving. It will lead to suffering and attachment and suffering. So abandonment of, say, craving, attachment comes when the mindfulness is there and when wisdom is functioning. It's really just a natural step when the qualities that are ready, the qualities of the mind, the skillful qualities of the mind are there, ready, they will do that. What we tend to do, we jump to wanting to get rid of stuff we don't like. We don't like these unpleasant memories. We don't like painful feelings in the body. We don't like mental agitation. We want to get rid of it all. And that often extends our suffering, because you're kind of fighting and creating more suffering as you go, rather than genuinely abandoning or letting go of things. You're sort of trying to push one thing away and introduce something better, but there's too much self involved, too much craving involved. Quite often that's the case. So it's a skill, isn't it? The skill of the practitioner, learning to be mindful, learning to reflect on or observe what's going on, then abandoning the unwholesome, cultivating the wholesome, but all the time letting go of the sense of self. And sometimes we do it well, and sometimes we don't. We suffer. So you keep learning, keep practicing. And that's where often people fade or fail, because they give up the effort. They go back to square one and give up, and seek out distraction and pleasure just to kind of get by, maybe. So of course, anything you like, you said, you gave examples, food, various views and opinions, people, anything you attach to will bring you suffering, because all these things don't last. Good food is nice, but it doesn't last. The happiness, the pleasure doesn't last, and sometimes you can't get the good food you want. Views and opinions also change, but also the clinging will lead to suffering, because you cling, maybe someone else challenges your view, or that view, by holding on to it, it's hiding some aspect of the truth, because it becomes a form of delusion, or has a deluding part to it, so then you suffer. You attach to a person. Nobody lasts forever. So, whether it's your children, your parents, your friend, your work colleague, or even just spiritual figures, people you find inspiring. No one's here forever. We're not here forever. They're not here forever. So that clinging attachment, unless it's investigated, and probably investigated many, many, many times, it will definitely lead to suffering. Suffering of grief, separation. Which is why we have these chants like we just did one now, separation from everything I love and like is sure. That's just a very normal statement of truth. And the Buddha recommended we bring it up as a reflection every day, and maybe many times a day, as the antidote to suffering. The antidote to attachment. As you start attaching to some person, you reflect, one day they will get old, sick, die, I will get old, sick, die, we will separate. That's certain. Everything else is not certain. We don't know how life will go and what's going to happen, but we do know everyone must separate through death. So you reflect on that day after day after day after day, and your mind gets accustomed to the truth, accepts it, sees it's just a normal way. It doesn't mean to say you can't be kind to people, have goodwill, love for people, but you also know the attachment will lead to suffering, so you must let go of the attachment. You move more towards unconditional loving kindness and acceptance of the impermanent nature of physical things, mental things, and people. I keep coming back to the task of establishing present moment awareness, mindfulness. When you are aware, you know what is coming up in your mind, and that is already a victory. Yes. When you are aware of yourself, you have more choice to follow a thought or an intention or let it go because you see the craving. Yep. You also have the choice to change your thinking and introduce more wholesome qualities. Yep. You may not stop craving arising at first, but you can choose not to engage with it, to follow it. Oh, I see. Well, that's a comment. That's like the answer. So, yes, 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 yes. It's not really a question. It's more like a statement. So, yes, all those things seem true. Sometimes we have the answer ready in our mind when we ask the question. Dear Lumpur, thank you for the teachings. I find the Lord Buddha's Anguttara Nikaya describing the results of a mind that has been tamed very inspiring and moving. The same mind, but due to the amount of effort put in and different time frame, could dwell in two contrasts. We are so near, yet so far. May I know how we should apply the teachings in our practice? Well, you're making a good start. So you have to develop understanding first on the level of study, learning, so listening to the Dhamma, reading the Dhamma, what we call Suttamaya Panya. And some people get really into that and study a lot, learn a lot, and that may suit them, and it brings them a lot of confidence, inspiration, energy. I've met monks who have spent the whole 3 months of the rains retreat, which we're just coming to the end of, just studying the Tripitaka, reading it from cover to cover, book by book by book, and maybe hardly sleeping at all. They're so inspired. They just read and get inspiration from reading the words of the Buddha. The great, the clarity of the Buddha's explanations, deep insights, similes, background reading as well, and they've, really benefited from that. You wouldn't do that every year probably, but maybe one year you really get into your studies. That's quite common. Other people just study a little bit, and they read a bit, listen a bit here and there. It keeps them topped up with enough information and enough inspiration to practice. And most of the teachers I've lived with, like Ajahn Kalyano, I didn't live with him, but his teachings and others, they tend to say you study in order to practice, to support the practice. So some people do study more, some less, but it's for the practice. It's not an end in itself, because we're not just linguists or philosophers or studying religion in this way you might in a university or so on. You may begin like that, but you have to move into the ways of practice as well. And you may refer back to your studies and learning from time to time to remind you, boost your understanding or clarify points. But it should be for the practice, developing calm and insight, meditation. So the second level of wisdom, what we call Jintamaya Panya, comes where you start to internalize what you've read and learned, understand it in your own mind, but with mindfulness. So you're focusing on the Dhamma, reflecting it, maybe comparing your experience, what you experience through your senses and in your life with what you've read and heard. But that is still not enough to abandon defilements. It's enough to give you the way of thinking and reflecting on the Dhamma, and it's a necessary step, and your wisdom and understanding deepens. But to actually really abandon, uproot defilement, which is the cause of suffering, you have to establish mindfulness and develop states of calm, samadhi, where the mind is very detached, equanimous, so that you can reflect in an objective way. And you develop what we call bhavana maya panya, the deepest level of insight, the insight that actually removes greed, anger, delusion, wrong views, craving, attachment from the mind. And that takes practice. In mindfulness we can develop some, and then it fades away and we're not so mindful all the time. And insight also takes practice. You have to practice reflecting on things and observing what's going on and learning, using the Dhamma you've learned, using mindfulness and observing, say, the impermanent nature of this body and then the mental aspects of our self, this feelings, perceptions, thought formations, sense consciousness. So what we call the five khandhas. To see the five khandhas as impermanent, suffering, not self, we really have to train our wisdom to investigate from a place of peace and ease, so the mind is not just trying to force this insight or just believing an insight, but actually observing, knowing, or witnessing. So Ajahn Chah talked about a state we call Sikhi Putto. That was the word he used. Some teachers say there's another way of saying it, or Titi Putang. Anyway, it's from the Pali, what he was referring to is, he called it the internal witness, or the observer. You could say the knower, where the mind is knowing experience in a detached way and seeing these five khandhas are impermanent, not self. So that's bhavana maya panya, the sort of deepest level of wisdom. So until that is established, like you say, you have this sort of, you're close to the Dhamma, you can read the highest Dhamma from the suttas, you can meet enlightened teachers maybe and listen to them, discuss with them. You may have your own insights sometimes as well, but your mind will tend in the beginning, the mind goes high and then it drops back down again. Goes to the wholesome Dhammas, and then the unwholesome Dhammas slip in, and so we have this up and down, or like you say, two contrasts, with the clarity of mindfulness and insight, and the Dhamma and the Sila is established, all the path factors are there, and then times when they drop away and you may have very coarse defilements return to your mind, and there's a lot of this, back and forth, or one side and the other. And you have to accept that, and it is very frustrating, but you keep going, and you learn, and gradually your mind doesn't fall back so far. When it falls back under the influence of craving, attachment, mental defilements. It may not fall back for so long or so far. Gradually you're sort of cleaning up some of the defilements. Last question. Luang Por, what shall we do when we know that making merit and practicing Dhamma is a good thing, but we cannot bring ourselves to do it? Well, that's maybe stemming from laziness, stubbornness, deeply ingrained habits and attachments. And in summary, you might say we like to take the easy way, and fighting the defilements, training the mind to see and abandon defilement is the hard way. It can be quite, like we've been discussing, challenging, frustrating, tiring, annoying, disappointing. And one of the things as you go through this spiritual struggle is, you often get spiritually disappointed, with your own efforts. You see your laziness, you see your stubbornness, you see your clinging and attachment, and it disappoints you and you create more suffering again. So up one step and then back 2 steps. It's a very frustrating process, but if you keep going, you learn. And as you learn, then you don't make quite the same mistakes so often. Whether it's on the level of precepts, training in mindfulness and meditation, or reflecting on the truth. As you learn, something will stick. And as the different aspects of the Dhamma stick, you become more peaceful. Hopefully it's more enjoyable, so then it's less of a struggle, or the struggle is less painful and frustrating, because if you're getting some peace, joy, happiness from your practice, that sustains you. You start to get more internal happiness from your practice, niramisa sukha. It's not dependent on external things. So then some of those old habits of always going to distraction when you face a bit of pain, or you're fed up, or you have a difficulty, or you're ill, normally you might just go to distraction, pleasure seeking, trying to blot out the suffering. You'll do that less, and you can sustain the mind to observe and understand your suffering better, because you also have some joy and peace on the inside. So they say, the Aryapugala, the noble ones, including the Sotapanna, the stream enterer, they get sick, but they still have certain qualities that never disappear. They still have some inner happiness that allows them to still contemplate body and mind as they're sick or in pain, not to attach to it so much, not to get so stressed about it, not to seek distraction from it, and not just sickness, but any kind of normal worldly experience that's unpleasant. People don't like you, or things go wrong, failures, difficulties. These things may still happen, but the mind also has some inner peace and joy that sustains it when it's coping with these normal parts of life, the painful parts of life. A noble one will still feel hungry if they haven't eaten. They'll still feel tired if they haven't slept. They'll still know that if someone is being rude or bullying them, they'll know that. But they also have something internal to sustain them, so they don't experience as much suffering as an ordinary unenlightened person would, and they won't do so many unskillful things as an ordinary unenlightened person might in those situations. So, what do we need to do to keep practicing when we experience this sort of lapse or loss of faith, loss of energy, distraction and so on? Well, number one, listen to the Dhamma. Nowadays it's very easy to listen to Dhamma from internet, books, and even travel to meet teachers and listen to teachings and have exchange with teachers and Kalyana Mitta. So associating with teachers and Kalyana Mitta is another factor. So listening to the Dhamma, associating with wise, good people, fellow practitioners, it's another factor that will sustain your faith, just bring up energy, help you to practice. If you associate with people who don't practice the Dhamma, have no faith in the Dhamma, no interest in the Dhamma, well, of course your mind will be affected by that. You'll tend to go another way, another direction. If you're living with people who don't practice Dhamma, nobody's going to tell you to meditate or be patient or abandon defilements. They may even cheer you on when you follow defilement. Let's go and get drunk. Let's sleep in and not meditate. The voices of Mara, you might call it. We have them in ourselves and then the people around us. So if you associate more with Kalyana Mitta, you'll get better voices telling you, advising you, giving you better examples, giving you better inputs in your life. So the Buddha encouraged us to associate with wise, good people, honour the worthy, respect those worthy of respect. So the Buddha himself, the Sangha, the teachers, well-practiced laity, respect them and give value to them in your life, because again that will uplift you as you work through defilements. And good routines is another one. Just get into good habits so that even if you're not particularly peaceful, you still get up to do some meditation, you still try and keep your precepts, you still listen to the Dhamma even when you're not very peaceful. If you've got into a good habit, that will help pull you through these more challenging times or challenging situations you might face. So many disciples of Ajahn Chah said it was because they lived with Ajahn Chah, heard his Dhamma, trained and learnt how to practice through this training that we do in the monastic form, but also lay people who would come into the monasteries. They said it kept them going. They thought if they hadn't met Ajahn Chah, they might have been a monk or a nun just for a short period. Or they might have attended the monastery as a layperson just for a short period and then gone on and done other things. But many people said associating with Ajahn Chah and then his students, who were well practiced as well, kept them going, kept them pushing through their own doubts, distractions, tiredness. And so, they continued maybe as a monk or a nun, a monastic for their whole life, or continued supporting the Sangha as a lay devotee, a lay practitioner their whole life. So you can see that, not just with Ajahn Chah Sangha, but all over the Buddhist world. You can see people, by associating with Kalyana Mitta, listening to the Dhamma regularly, they stay with the Dhamma, and it gives them the patience and the strength and the energy to go through the ups and downs of life and these moments where we get lazy or stubborn. It helps to balance the view that you hold, your views as well, because often out in the world we get into wrong views and think things that are actually destructive to us or hurtful to others may mistakenly think it's good or the right thing to do when it's not. So, those are tonight's questions, and we'll leave it there and wish you well with your Dhamma practice.